Ethan was just a regular boy living on a quiet Earth colony, far from the excitement and dangers of the galaxy. His life was simple: school, chores, and dreams of adventure in the farthest reaches of space. He never imagined that one day his world would turn upside down. Everything started when Ethan received a strange letter. The envelope was sealed with an alien mark, something he had only seen in the movies. It was from his uncle, the man he knew only through stories and rumors. His uncle had lived a mysterious life, one filled with secrets and connections to the alien worlds. Ethan had never been close to him, but he had always been told that his uncle was a man of great power and influence. The letter stated that Ethan's uncle had passed away, and now Ethan had inherited his vast fortune and something much more important, a title in an intergalactic treaty. Ethan was shocked. He barely understood what that meant, but the letter explained it all. His uncle's estate, planets, and property in distant galaxies now belonged to him. However, there was one condition. Ethan had to marry someone. Not just anyone, but a powerful alien princess named Lyra. At first, Ethan thought it was a joke. How could a regular boy like him, who had never even left Earth, be married to an alien princess? But as he read further, it became clear. This was no joke. The will stated that Ethan and Lyra had to marry for the inheritance to be valid. Their union was the key to securing peace among the various factions his uncle had dealt with, and so Ethan's life changed in a way he could never have imagined. Ethan had never met Lyra before, but from what the letter told him, she was a powerful alien princess from a faraway planet. She was a warrior and a leader, commanding armies and ruling over vast lands. The letter also warned him that she would not be happy about this arrangement. In fact, she had already refused to marry anyone, but now the fate of an entire galaxy depended on it. The very thought of it filled Ethan with uncertainty. What did he know about ruling planets or commanding armies? He was just a boy. What could he offer to someone like Lyra, who had lived her whole life among warriors and politicians? He had no choice but to go along with the will's conditions. But he couldn't help but feel a deep sense of dread. After weeks of preparation, Ethan finally arrived on the alien ship that would take him to Lyra's planet. The ship was unlike anything he had ever seen. It was a huge, sleek vessel, capable of traveling faster than the speed of light. Inside, everything was strange and unfamiliar. The crew members were all aliens from different planets, but they treated him with a strange mixture of respect and fear. They didn't speak much to him, but Ethan could tell they were nervous about the situation. As they traveled, Ethan spent his time trying to prepare himself for what lay ahead. He read everything he could about Lyra, trying to learn about the woman he was supposed to marry. From the documents, he learned that she was a fierce leader, respected and feared by many. She was known for her intelligence, strength, and beauty. But despite her power, Lyra was also known for her stubbornness and independence. She had never agreed to marry anyone, and now she was being forced into this union because of his uncle's will. When the ship finally arrived at Lyra's home planet, Ethan was amazed by the beauty of the world. The skies were a deep purple, and the land below was covered in lush green forests and towering mountains. It was a peaceful world, but one that had been in constant turmoil for centuries. Lyra's people had been at war with other factions, and her power was the only thing keeping them from falling into chaos. Ethan's heart raced as he stepped off the ship. He could see a group of people waiting for him, Lyra's guards and advisors. They looked at him with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. Ethan felt out of place, but he stood tall and tried to keep his composure. He was about to meet the woman who would become his wife, and everything depended on him making a good impression. As the group walked him toward the grand palace, Ethan couldn't help but notice the tension in the air. Everyone seemed to be holding their breath, as though waiting for something terrible to happen. The palace itself was a massive structure, built with strange, shining materials that Ethan had never seen before. It was both beautiful and intimidating. When they finally reached the throne room, Ethan saw her, Lyra. She was sitting on a large throne, surrounded by her advisors and guards. Her eyes were sharp and cold, and her expression was one of complete authority. She looked nothing like the shy, uncertain girl Ethan had imagined. Instead, she was a warrior, strong and unyielding, with the weight of the galaxy on her shoulders. Ethan stood at the entrance, unsure of what to do next. He had never been in a situation like this before, and he had no idea how to approach a powerful alien princess. But before he could move, Lyra stood up, her eyes locking onto his. "So, you are the human boy who inherited everything," she said, her voice calm but filled with authority. "I must admit, I didn't expect you to be so young." Ethan swallowed hard. "I didn't expect this either," he replied, his voice barely above a whisper. Lyra's gaze softened for a moment, but then her face hardened again. "I don't want this marriage," she said, her voice sharp. "I never agreed to it, and I won't be forced into it now. But the will is clear, and we both know what's at stake." Ethan nodded. He knew that the fate of the galaxy rested on this strange, unwanted union. But as he looked into Lyra's eyes, he couldn't help but wonder if there was more to her than just the powerful princess everyone spoke of. Perhaps, despite her resistance, there was a chance for them to build something meaningful. Ethan had never imagined that his life would turn into something so complicated. Here he was, standing in the grand palace of an alien princess, about to meet the woman who was supposed to be his wife. Even though she didn't want him, he tried to stay calm, but the tension in the air was thick, almost suffocating. Lyra's cold eyes watched him, like a lion observing its prey. "I don't need a human boy to inherit my throne," Lyra said, her voice sharp and full of command. "Your uncle's will might have forced this marriage, but you should know this. I don't take orders from anyone." Ethan felt a shiver run down his spine, but he stood tall. He wasn't about to back down. Not yet. He knew this was the beginning of something he didn't fully understand, but he was determined to learn. After all, his future and the future of the galaxy depended on this strange arrangement. "I didn't choose this either," Ethan replied, trying to sound confident. "But we don't have a choice. We'll have to make it work for both our sakes." Lyra's eyes narrowed as she studied him. Ethan could tell that she didn't trust him. And why should she? He was just a human, a boy with no power or experience. What could he possibly offer someone like her? Still, she didn't break her gaze. "I didn't ask for your help," Lyra said. "But since we are stuck with each other, we might as well get this over with. Follow me." Ethan followed her, unsure of what to expect. He had no idea what kind of life he would lead here, in this strange palace with people who were completely different from him. As they walked down the long, polished hallways, Lyra's guards followed closely behind, their eyes never leaving Ethan. The atmosphere felt heavy, like everyone was watching him, waiting for him to make a mistake. They arrived in a large room, where Lyra's advisors were waiting. They were a mixture of different alien species, some with scales, others with wings, and a few with glowing eyes. They all looked at Ethan with suspicion, as though he didn't belong. "This is the human boy, Ethan," Lyra said, gesturing toward him. "He is the one who will inherit the title of Lord of the Galactic Alliance. At least until I find a way to undo this nonsense." Ethan tried to hide his unease. These aliens were powerful, and they didn't seem to care much for him. He was just a boy, after all, and he had no idea what he was doing. But he couldn't let fear take over him. "Not now, Lord of the Galactic Alliance," one of the advisors muttered, his voice thick with disbelief. "A human boy. This is absurd." "Indeed," another advisor agreed. "But the will is clear. The boy is now the ruler of our territories. We must respect that." Lyra's eyes flashed with anger. "Respect it? I will not be ruled by a human. I will find a way to change this. But for now, we will have to follow the will of my late uncle." Ethan stood quietly, listening to the conversation. He didn't want to speak out of turn, but he couldn't help feeling like he was in over his head. He had no idea how to rule anything, let alone an entire galaxy. And now he was expected to do so with Lyra, a woman who clearly didn't want him around. The advisors began discussing plans for the future. Ethan could barely follow their alien language, but he understood. One thing, They didn't trust him. He could feel the tension in the room. Like everyone was just waiting for him to fail. And Lyra? She seemed determined to make him fail, to dot as the meeting ended. Lyra turned to Ethan with a cold expression. You'll stay here in the palace for now. We need to put on a show for the galaxy. But don't think for a second that I trust you. Ethan nodded. He didn't expect her to trust him, after all. Why would she? He was just a boy. But he couldn't shake the feeling that maybe, just maybe, they could work together. He had to try. He had no other choice. That evening, as Ethan sat alone in his room, he found himself reflecting on everything that had happened. The palace was enormous, with strange, alien decorations he had never seen before. The walls were made of shimmering stone, and the windows looked out onto a world that was both beautiful and intimidating. The air felt different here, charged with energy. It was as if the very atmosphere was alive with power. Ethan knew that things were only going to get more complicated from here. He had inherited more than just a title. He had inherited a whole new life, one that was filled with politics, power struggles, and alien customs he didn't understand. And worst of all, he had inherited Lyra, a powerful alien princess who didn't want him and had no intention of making things easy. As he lay in bed that night, staring up at the ceiling, he thought about his future. He was just a boy from Earth. How was he supposed to rule the galaxy? How was he supposed to earn Lyra's respect? The weight of it all felt heavy on his chest. But deep down, Ethan knew one thing. He couldn't give up. He had to find a way to make this work, no matter how hard it was. The next morning, Lyra arrived at his door. She looked as regal and fierce as ever, her eyes scanning him with a mixture of distrust and curiosity. Get ready, she said. We are going to meet with the leaders of the galactic factions. They'll want to know how we plan to rule. Ethan swallowed hard. This was it, the moment he had been dreading. But he didn't have time to be scared. He had to keep moving forward. He had to prove that he was more than just a boy. He was the ruler of the Galactic Alliance, whether Lyra liked it or not. All right, Ethan said, standing up. I'm ready. Lyra studied him for a moment, her expression unreadable. Then, without a word, she turned and walked out of the room. Expecting him to follow, Ethan took a deep breath and followed her, knowing that the hardest part of his journey was only just beginning. Ethan had never imagined he would find himself at the center of a galactic political meeting. As he followed Lyra down the grand hallway of the palace, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was all too big for him. He was just a boy from Earth, with no experience in ruling anything, let alone an entire galaxy. Yet here he was, about to sit at the table with some of the most powerful alien leaders in the universe. Lyra walked ahead of him with a sense of purpose, her regal posture radiating confidence and authority. She seemed like someone who belonged in a room full of leaders, someone who had been in charge her entire life. Ethan, on the other hand, felt like an imposter, unsure of how he had ended up in this position. He had no idea what these alien leaders expected from him, or how he was supposed to help Lyra navigate the complex web of galactic politics. When they entered the meeting room, the atmosphere was tense. The room was large and filled with beings of all shapes and sizes, each more different from the other than Ethan could imagine. Some were tall, with long, flowing tentacles, while others were small and covered in shimmering scales. Some had wings, others had multiple eyes. Despite their differences, they all shared one thing in common: power. The table in the center of the room was round, and it was surrounded by several high-ranking alien leaders, including representatives from the different factions that Lyra and her uncle had worked with. The most prominent of them was Captain Zorth, a fierce leader of a war-hardened alien species known for their advanced weaponry and battle tactics. His species had been allies of Lyra's for years, but they also saw her as a powerful political tool to control. He was a force to be reckoned with, and Ethan couldn't help but feel intimidated as he took his seat at the table. Lyra sat down beside him, her eyes scanning the room. As the other leaders took their seats, the silence hung in the air. It felt as though everyone was waiting for someone else to speak first. Finally, Captain Zorth broke the silence. "So, the human boy is here," he said, his voice deep and filled with authority. His eyes locked onto Ethan. "Tell me, young one, how do you plan to lead the Galactic Alliance?" Ethan froze. His mouth went dry, and his heart pounded in his chest. This was at the moment he had been dreading. He had no idea what to say. He wasn't a leader, not like Lyra or the other alien leaders in the room. He was just a boy who had inherited a title he didn't want. But then, he remembered something. He had to try. He had to prove that he wasn't just a helpless pawn in this game. He was here because of his uncle's will, and whether he liked it or not, he was part of this galaxy now. "I am still learning," Ethan said, his voice shaky but determined. "I may not have experience, but I'm willing to learn. I know that leading the Alliance is about more than just power. It's about understanding the needs of everyone involved." Lyra glanced at him from the corner of her eye, and for a brief moment, Ethan saw something soften in her gaze. It was only for a second, but it was enough to give him the confidence he needed. "Learning?" Captain Zorth sneered. "How can a human learn to lead something as vast as the Galactic Alliance? You have no experience with war, no understanding of politics. You are nothing but a child." Ethan felt a knot tighten in his stomach, but he refused to let Zorth's words shake him. He had to stand his ground. "I may be young," Ethan replied, "but I believe that even the smallest voices matter. I will listen to everyone, not just the strongest or the loudest. That's how I'll lead." There was a long silence in the room. Ethan couldn't tell if the others were impressed or just annoyed. But then, surprisingly, it was Lyra who spoke next. "He is right about one thing," she said, her voice steady and calm. "Leadership isn't just about strength. It's about understanding and unity. And that is something that the Galactic Alliance has lacked for too long." Ethan looked at her, surprised by her words. Lyra had always seemed so distant and cold. But here she was, standing up for him, even though she didn't want to be tied to him. For the first time, Ethan felt a sense of hope. Maybe they could make this work after all. Captain Zorth grunted, clearly annoyed by the direction the conversation was taking. "Very well," he said, "but know this, boy, if you fail, it will not just be your failure. It will be the failure of the entire Alliance, and I will not tolerate that." Ethan nodded, trying to look more confident than he felt. "I understand." The meeting continued, with each leader discussing their concerns and strategies for the future. Ethan listened carefully, trying to absorb as much as he could. Every now and then, Lyra would glance at him, her expression unreadable. She didn't offer him much guidance, but Ethan appreciated the silence. He knew this was his chance to prove himself. As the discussions grew more heated, Ethan began to realize something. The leaders of the factions didn't trust him, not yet. They saw him as weak, as a pawn in a game they had been playing for years. But there was something else he noticed as well. Despite their reluctance to accept him, they were watching him. They were waiting to see what he would do. That night, as the meeting broke up and everyone returned to their quarters, Ethan couldn't help but feel a mixture of exhaustion and determination. He had survived the meeting, but that was just the beginning. There were so many more challenges ahead. He wasn't just trying to win the respect of the galaxy's leaders. He had to win Lyra's trust as well. When he returned to his room, he found a small package waiting for him on the desk. It was from Lyra. Ethan opened it to find a small, ancient-looking book. It was filled with alien symbols and diagrams. But what caught his attention was the note that came with it. It was short and to the point. "You will need to understand the customs of my people if you are to lead," the note read. Study this carefully. Ethan felt a surge of gratitude toward Lyra. She didn't have to help him, but here she was, giving him the tools to understand her world. As he opened the book and began to read, Ethan realized that this wasn't just a political game. This was about survival, surviving the galaxy's expectations, surviving Lyra's cold heart, and surviving the enemies who were waiting for him to fail. But Ethan wasn't going to let that happen. He would learn. He would prove that he was more than just a boy from Earth. Ethan sat in his room late into the night, flipping through the strange alien book that Lyra had given him. The symbols on the pages were intricate and unfamiliar, but something about them drew him in. This was more than just an instruction manual. For understanding Lyra's people, it was a glimpse into her world, into the culture and customs that had shaped her. For the first time, Ethan realized that the challenges he faced weren't just about politics or power. They were about understanding the woman who would, whether she liked it or not, become his partner. The book explained the ancient traditions of Lyra's people, the rulers of a vast empire, known for their strength and wisdom. Their culture valued loyalty, bravery, and honor above all else. These were the qualities that had made Lyra a fierce and respected leader. But the book also reveals something that struck Ethan deeply. The bond between the ruler and their partner was not just political, it was personal. It was a union of hearts and minds meant to guide the people through difficult times. Ethan closed the book and leaned back in his chair, feeling a mixture of frustration and determination. He had been thrust into a world that was completely unfamiliar to him, and now he was expected to lead. How could he, a boy with no experience in leadership, possibly understand something as complex as alien politics, let alone win Lyra's respect? But then again, maybe that was the key. Lyra hadn't chosen this life. She had been born into it, raised to be a leader in a world where emotions were often set aside for the sake of duty. He couldn't expect her to suddenly embrace him or their situation, but he could learn. He could understand her, and maybe, just maybe, that would be enough. The next morning, Lyra appeared at his door as usual. She looked as regal as ever, her expression unreadable. Ethan couldn't tell if she was annoyed with him or just tired of the situation. But when she spoke, her voice was calm, though there was a hint of something else in her tone, something softer. "We need to talk," she said, "about the future of the Alliance." Ethan nodded, standing up. He had been expecting this conversation, but he wasn't sure how it would go. Lyra had made it clear that she didn't want this marriage, and the tension between them was thick. But maybe this was the moment for change. Maybe they could find a way to make things work. They walked together down the long hallways of the palace, past rooms filled with advisors and soldiers, to a private garden at the back of the palace. The garden was peaceful, filled with strange, colorful plants that Ethan had never seen before. It was a place of quiet reflection, a contrast to the cold, formal atmosphere inside the palace. Lyra stopped in the center of the garden and turned to face him. "I've been thinking," she began, "about what you said yesterday about leading through understanding, not just strength. I didn't want to admit it, but maybe you're right." Ethan's heart raced. He wasn't sure if he had heard her correctly. Was Lyra actually saying that she was starting to respect him? "You think you can change the way we lead?" she asked, her voice still guarded, but less harsh than before. "The galaxy is full of old traditions, of rules that have been in place for centuries. I don't know if we can just throw them all away, but maybe we can find a middle ground." Ethan took a deep breath. "I don't know the first thing about your traditions, Lyra," he admitted, "but I do know that we can't keep going on like this. I know that I can't do this without your help, and maybe we can figure out a way to work together, not as enemies, but as partners." Lyra's gaze softened, just for a moment, but she quickly regained her composure. "Partners," she repeated, almost as if the word itself was foreign to her. "I never wanted to be anyone's partner. I was raised to rule alone. But I suppose you might be right. Maybe we can make this work, but it won't be easy, and you'll have to prove yourself to me." Ethan nodded, relieved that she was at least willing to consider the possibility. "I will. I'll do whatever it takes." The two of them stood there for a few moments, the weight of their words hanging in the air. For the first time, there was a sense of understanding between them, even if it was only a small spark. Over the next few days, Ethan and Lyra spent more time together, working through the details of how to run the Galactic Alliance. Ethan spent hours reading about the history of Lyra's people, learning their customs, their laws, and their strategies. Lyra, though reluctant, began to teach him about the different factions and how to navigate the political landscape. She still remained distant, but her lessons were more patient than before, and slowly, Ethan began to understand her better. One evening, After a long day of discussions, Ethan found himself walking through the palace grounds, lost in thought. He had learned so much in such a short time, but there was still so much to learn. He couldn't help but feel a sense of awe as he looked up at the stars. He had never imagined that his life would lead him to a place like this, to a position of such responsibility. But there was no turning back now. He had to prove that he was worthy of the title his uncle had given him, and that he could lead the galaxy into a better future. As Ethan stood there, staring at the stars, he heard footsteps behind him. He turned to see Lyra approaching, her expression serious but not unkind. "I wanted to thank you," she said quietly, looking up at the stars as well, "for not giving up. I didn't expect you to understand so quickly, but I'm beginning to see that maybe there's something to your way of thinking." Ethan smiled, feeling a warmth in his chest. "I'm just trying to learn. I know I'm not perfect, and I know I have a lot to prove, but I'll keep trying." Lyra nodded, and for the first time, there was a hint of a smile on her lips. "We'll see if you're up to the challenge," she said. Ethan didn't know what the future held, but for the first time since arriving, he felt like he had a chance. He wasn't alone anymore. Lyra, despite everything, was starting to accept him not just as a ruler, but as someone who could help her make a difference. Together, they would face the challenges of the galaxy, and together, they would find a way to lead. The days were growing longer, and the stakes higher, as Ethan and Lyra worked together to manage the Galactic Alliance. They faced new challenges every day. With each passing moment, the weight of their duties pressed down on both of them, and the tension between them, though still there, began to shift. They weren't allies, not yet, but they were no longer enemies either. Lyra had made it clear that she would not trust Ethan easily, but over time, she began to see him not just as a boy, but as someone who was genuinely trying to learn and contribute. Ethan, for his part, was determined to prove himself every day. He spent hours studying the history of Lyra's people, learning about their wars, their customs, and the delicate balance of power that held the galaxy together. One evening, as Ethan sat in his study, going over reports about the growing unrest among the different factions of the Alliance, he felt a sudden shift in the atmosphere. The palace had been quiet for days, but now there was a sense of unease in the air. He couldn't quite put his finger on it, but he knew something was coming. Lyra appeared in the doorway of his study, her face hard with determination. "We need to talk," she said, her voice sharp. There was something in her tone that made Ethan's heart skip a beat. This wasn't just another meeting. This was something more. Ethan stood quickly, sensing the urgency in her words. "What's happening?" "There's trouble." Lyra replied, "I've received word that a rival faction has mobilized against us. They want control of the Alliance, and they've made it clear that they'll stop at nothing to take it. We need to be ready." Ethan's mind raced. The galaxy was a vast and dangerous place, full of factions that were always vying for power. But he never imagined that they would turn on him so quickly. He had only just started to gain Lyra's trust, and now he was facing a test that could either make or break him. "I'll prepare," Ethan said, his voice steady, though his insides were anything but calm. "What do you need from me?" Lyra met his gaze, her eyes searching his face for something strength, determination, loyalty. "I need you to trust me," she said, her voice softening for just a moment. "We're going to face this together, but you have to be ready for anything. These people are ruthless. They won't hesitate to take everything we have if we're not careful." Ethan nodded. He had never been through a war, but he understood the weight of responsibility. If the galaxy fell into chaos, it wouldn't just be Lyra who suffered it. It would be everyone. He couldn't let that happen. Together, they went to the war room, where Lyra's generals and advisors were already gathered. The room was dark, filled with screens displaying intelligence reports and strategic maps. The tension in the room was palpable, as the leaders of the various factions in the Alliance began to argue over the best course of action. Lyra took her place at the head of the table, and the room fell silent. Ethan stood at her side, trying his best to appear confident, though he was still unsure of his role in all of this. He wasn't a military strategist, and he had no experience in leading troops, but he had a feeling that this would be the moment that defined his future. We need a plan, Lyra said, her voice cutting through the tension. The enemy is closing in, and we can't afford to wait any longer. Captain Zorth, one of the fiercest leaders in the Alliance, stood up. I've been watching the enemy's movements. They're making their way toward our outer colonies, and they're coming fast. We need to mobilize our fleet, or we'll lose everything. Ethan watched the conversation unfold, trying to make sense of it all. The stakes were higher than he had ever imagined, and he realized that every decision they made now could determine the fate of the entire galaxy. He had to contribute, to show that he was more than just a boy caught in a battle between power-hungry factions. What do you think, Ethan? Lyra's voice broke through his thoughts, and he looked up, startled to find everyone's eyes on him. You've been studying the history of our people. What do you suggest? Ethan's heart pounded. In his chest, this was the moment. He had to make a decision, and it had to be the right one. He thought about the stories he had read, about the great leaders who had faced impossible odds and found a way to succeed. He couldn't let fear hold him back. We need to unite the factions, he said, his voice stronger than he felt. If we fight amongst ourselves, we'll only make ourselves weaker. We need to show them that we stand together, no matter our differences. Lyra looked at him, her expression unreadable. For a moment, the room was silent. Then, slowly, she nodded. Wise words, she said. We will unite, or we will fall. The room erupted into conversation as the leaders began to discuss their next steps. Ethan watched Lyra closely, seeing how she moved through the room with authority, directing the conversation with ease. Despite her cold demeanor, there was something about her that commanded respect. Ethan realized that he had a lot to learn, but maybe, just maybe, he could be the leader she needed. As the meeting continued, Lyra turned to him once again. I'm trusting you, Ethan. This plan will only work if we can count on each other. You need to lead, too, not just follow. Ethan swallowed hard. This was more than he had ever expected. Leading a galaxy was one thing, leading alongside Lyra was another. But this wasn't just about strategy and power, it was about loyalty. They were in this together, whether they liked it or not. As the meeting drew to a close, the leaders of the Alliance agreed on a plan. They would unite their forces and strike back against the enemy before they could reach the heart of the Alliance. It wasn't going to be easy, but it was their only chance. Ethan felt a sense of responsibility settle over him. He wasn't just a boy anymore. He had made a decision, and now he had to live with it. He had to prove that he could be a leader, that he could stand beside Lyra and help guide the galaxy through its darkest hour. Later that night, as Ethan lay in bed, he thought about everything that had happened, the weight of what he had agreed to was heavy, but for the first time, he didn't feel so alone. He had a purpose now, and Lyra, despite her stubbornness, was willing to stand by him. As the stars outside the palace window twinkled in the sky, Ethan knew that the road ahead would be long and difficult. But one thing was certain, he wasn't giving up. Not now. Not ever. The days leading up to the battle were filled with preparations. The atmosphere in the palace was tense, but there was also a sense of unity that hadn't existed before. Ethan and Lyra worked side by side, learning to trust each other more. With each passing moment, the galaxy, once a place of chaos and division, was beginning to feel like something they could fight for together. Ethan had never experienced anything like this before. He had gone from a simple boy on Earth with no real responsibilities to being at the center of a galactic conflict. He had to lead, to make decisions that could change the future of millions. And every decision he made was crucial, not just for his own survival, but for the survival of the people he had come to care about. Lyra, though still distant and guarded, had shown him more respect over the past few days. She had even started to rely on him more, not just as a partner in name, but as someone whose opinions mattered. Ethan had learned to listen carefully, to think about the needs of the people they were leading, and to always keep the bigger picture in mind. The night before the battle, they stood together on the balcony of the palace. looking out at the vastness of the stars. The galaxy seemed so peaceful from up here, but Ethan knew that peace was fragile. It was a feeling that had haunted him since the day he had inherited this title. Lyra stood beside him, her gaze fixed on the horizon. Tomorrow will be the day. That defines everything, she said softly, her voice carrying the weight of years of responsibility. If we fail, the Alliance will crumble. If we succeed, we might just bring peace to this galaxy. Ethan nodded, feeling the pressure settle. In his chest, I don't know if I'm ready for this, he admitted. I'm just a boy. How can I lead them all? Lyra turned to him, her expression softer than it had been in days. You've already shown that you have what it takes, Ethan. It's not about being ready. It's about doing what you believe is right, even when you're scared. Ethan met her gaze, and for the first time, he felt as though he wasn't just the human boy who had inherited a title. He was part of something much larger, and the bond between him and Lyra was stronger than it had ever been. As the two of them stood together, Ethan couldn't help but feel a sense of peace. Tomorrow would be a battle, not just for their lives, but for the future of the galaxy. But he wasn't alone. He had Lyra at his side, and together, they would fight for what they believed in. The next day, the battle began. The enemy fleet approached, a massive armada of ships that filled the sky. With darkness, Ethan stood with Lyra, watching from the command center as the first wave of ships launched from their stations. The sounds of battle filled the air, and the tension was nearly unbearable. Every ship, every commander, and every soldier was part of this fight. It wasn't just about survival, it was about the future they wanted to build. Lyra took control of the situation, her calm and strategic mind leading the charge. Ethan stood beside her, offering support and suggestions as the battle raged on. He may not have been a military leader, but he had learned enough from Lyra to know how to guide their forces. He knew that this battle was not just about winning, it was about showing the galaxy that they were stronger together. As the battle progressed, the enemy fleet began to falter. The Alliance's forces, united under Lyra's leadership and strengthened by Ethan's newfound resolve, pushed back with everything they had. But just when they thought they had won, a new threat appeared. An enemy ship, larger and more powerful than anything they had faced before, broke through their defenses and headed straight for the heart of the Alliance. The room fell silent as the massive ship appeared on the screens. The enemy ship was unlike anything they had ever seen. It was covered in armor, its weapons glowing with dangerous energy. It was clear that this was the final test, the moment that would decide the outcome of the entire battle. Lyra looked at Ethan, her face a mixture of determination and fear. We need to stop that ship, or we'll lose everything, she said, her voice steady, but her eyes reflecting the gravity of the situation. Ethan didn't hesitate. He knew what had to be done. He had learned enough about the Alliance's fleet to know how to outsmart the enemy. We can't face it head on, he said quickly. We need to use our agility, our speed. If we can get close enough, we can disable its weapons and take it down from the inside. Lyra nodded, her gaze focused. Then let's do it. The two of them worked quickly, coordinating the attack with the fleet. It was a risky move, but it was their only chance. As the massive enemy ship approached, Ethan felt his heart race. This was the moment that would determine everything. The future of the galaxy rested on their shoulders. The battle was intense. The enemy ship fired massive blasts, shaking the entire fleet. But Ethan and Lyra's plan worked. With quick thinking and precise movements, they managed to disable the enemy ship's weapons and board it. The two of them led the charge, cutting through enemy forces with the help of their soldiers. They fought side by side, proving that they were more than just partners in name. They were a team, and together they could accomplish anything. Finally, after what felt like hours, the enemy ship was brought down. The remaining forces retreated, and the galaxy was safe once again. As the dust settled, Ethan looked at Lyra, his heart swelling with pride. They had done it, together. They had saved the Alliance and secured a future for the galaxy. Lyra turned to him, her face softening as she met his eyes. You did it, she said, her voice filled with respect. We did it, Ethan smiled, feeling a sense of fulfillment that he had never known before. We did it together. In the aftermath of the battle, the galaxy began to rebuild. The factions that had once fought for power now stood united under the leadership of Ethan and Lyra. They had proven that, despite their differences, they could achieve something greater than themselves. As the stars twinkled above them, Ethan realized that he had found his place in the galaxy. He wasn't just a boy who inherited a title. He was a leader, a partner, and someone who had earned his place among the stars.